All right, welcome back to the build series, everybody. This one's going to be a little different. I'll put some text in the background to talk about what I'm doing on the bike and let that run in the background while I answer a question from the last video, which is why am I racing the Super Hooligan class for Motor America in 2024? Definitely a loaded question, but let's get into it. So to give you a little background, I raced 3 professional races last year in 23, which was my pro debut. Now, that was 2 Super Hooligan rounds and 1 Super Sport round. I raced the Ridge and Laguna in the Super Hooligan class on a friend's Indian FTR 1200, given an awesome opportunity to get into my first professional racing experience. And then I decided to take my personal bike at the time, a ZX6R, to Circuit of the Americas and race the Super Sport grid. So that whole experience last year gave me a lot of insight into the Motor America grid, the paddock, and how things run. What I also learned were a lot of the differences between different classes. So when I was looking at 2024, I wanted to do a full season. I knew that off the bat. Which class would give me the best chance of being as competitive as possible while also not breaking the bank? Well, when you're talking about time and money, which are my primary reasons behind choosing Super Hooligan, time, there's 9 or 10 rounds, depending how you look at it, for Super Sport. 10 if you include the Daytona 200, 9 if you don't, because it's not a points-paying round. Versus Super Hooligan, there's only 5 rounds. So time-wise and logistically, this is not my day job. I wish it was. Not quite, good enough to make this a full-time gig, but I don't have enough time, simply put, in my day job to take away 9-10 times in the season to get away and travel to each of these rounds. Now, this does play into the money aspect, so the next thing we'll talk about, which is really the primary reason, is money. So with double the amount of rounds in the Super Sport grid, the season entry is essentially double the amount of money. So you're talking about thousands more dollars just to cover your race entry fees and wristbands for your crew. So that's one reason. The second is your bike/motor. And talking about how that relates to the competitiveness in the class. The Super Hooligan class has been around, I believe, since 2019, so it's the newest class in the grid for Motor America, and the Super Sport has been around forever, and it's the direct feeder class, a premier class, to the Superbike grid. So naturally, it's a much more established class. There's just simply way more competition in the Super Sport grid than there is the Super Hooligan grid. Granted, there are still top national level riders and past champions running at the top of each of these classes. However, that list is a lot shorter in the Super Hooligan class versus the Super Sport class. So the grid is just not quite as deep in the Super Hooligan class. It is, after all, an exhibition class meant to get amateur expert racers into the professional scene of racing. What this competition level means is that the Super Sport grid has a lot more money into their teams than the Super Hooligan grid does. So essentially, to get your bike to be competitive in the Super Hooligan class will cost you far less money than a competitive Super Sport build will. For instance, I have it on pretty good authority that a lot of the Super Sport racers have $20,000 to $30,000 in their motor build alone on their bikes, which for me personally, I simply can't afford. Versus the Super Hooligan class, I'm building this 890, I'm not doing motor work, and I'm not putting suspension on it. Neither of those two things quite yet. It might happen in the future. But I would still argue this is a fairly competitive bike. It's not going to be the fastest bike on the grid by any means, but it will definitely hold its own, and I'm going to see what I can do with it and go from there. Now for the Super Sport, my ZX6R was built out pretty well. I had K-Tech full suspension on it. I had some ported intake runners, and I had a basic intake exhaust and tune. And it did pretty well. It was a fun, fast bike. But my trap speed at Circuit of the Americas on the back straightaway was 151 miles an hour, I believe. The top guys were doing 162 miles an hour. Now, yes, they're much faster racers than I am, and they earn their spots on those teams and to get that equipment. But at the same time, that's just not time that I can make up, The next monetary reason is tires. It gets a little bit more complicated, but briefly, you use a lot more tires in a Super Sport race weekend with Moto America than you do in the Super Hooligan. You get a tire allocation, which in Super Sport, which tells you how many tires you can use throughout the weekend. And you have to put stickers on your tires to keep count of them, and they don't let you go out unless you have those stickers on. So essentially, I can get away with a lot cheaper of a tire bill for the weekend in the Hooligan class by running secondhand or tear-off tires and still being fairly competitive. Whereas Super Sport, almost everybody has brand new tires all the time for each of the sessions. In addition to that, the sessions themselves are longer in Super Sport. So practice and qualifying maybe 30, 35 minutes a piece, and then the races are twice as long as the Hooligan class, whereas Hooligans are 10 to 15 minute sessions for qualifying practice, and we do like 8-lap sprint races versus 16 plus laps in the Super Sport category. So you go through a lot more rubber, and at the end of a weekend, like at COTA, you'll spend $2,000 to $3,000 on tires alone, and that's just not feasible for me when you're talking about twice the amount of rounds for the Super Sport category. And then the last one is payout, which seems a little counterintuitive, but essentially the Super Sport grid pays out a lot more money than the Hooligan class does. But it does not come close to covering the expenses it takes to run in that category if you're going to run, kind of lower down in the grid, which, to be honest, I'm perfectly okay with. I know that that's kind of my place. I got a DNF in the first race at COTA and a 20th place in the second race. But that 20th place paid me $500 in the mail, a check for that one race from Moto America. Whereas my top 10 finish at Laguna in the Super Hooligan category paid me $100. So yeah, it's more money in Super Sport, but there's just too much more money coming out to be there than the Hooligan category. And then the last piece I'll offer, which isn't time or money related, is just the general atmosphere of the Hooligan class versus the Premier class in Super Sport. So Parc Ferme, where we have to go to get technically inspected to make sure our bikes are still up to regulation. After the Ridge and Laguna in the Hooligan class, we were just talking mess to each other between racers, talking about how fun the race was, just having a good time, and it was a very relaxed atmosphere. Conversely, I go to COTA and get done with qualifying and the races in Super Sport, and it's completely different. Everyone's, for the most part, very serious. Umbrellas come out, the suspension guy comes out, the tire guy comes out, the team crowds around their rider to debrief what happened, to pull data off the bike, to go over suspension adjustments for the next race, et cetera, which is all well and good. And it was a really cool thing to be a part of, but not many people talk to each other all that much, and it's just a much more serious business job-like atmosphere that I didn't necessarily not like. It was just more fun. I'm there to have fun. I'm a weekend warrior type guy. I just happen to be decent enough, to be on the grid with these amazingly fast guys and gals and to mix it up. But I'm just there to have fun, man. So the Super Hooligan class, it's definitely why, that's why all these reasons are why I chose to be in this class for 24. Time and money and atmosphere. So I hope that answers your question. Let me know if you have any more questions in the comments. I'll go ahead and unmute here and get back to the build. All right, I'm actually going to back up a little and explain this canister valve removal that I just did. So now that I semi-understand it, so we have the two hoses coming from the fuel tank, right? This first one that terminates straight down here and goes to nothing, to the ground, is simply the overflow for the tank. That will evacuate any excess fluids from your fuel cap. The second one, however, is what the canister valve is meant for. So any of the gaseous fumes coming from your tank, manufacturers and emissions control standards basically want your bike to consume those and not the atmosphere to make a cleaner environment, right? So this line comes straight down to this Y. Part of it gets sent down to this big thick line back here that just gets evacuated there, I guess, for overflow. But the rest of it goes into the intake side of the canister, which is full of charcoal, which kind of cleans that gas enough or turns it into a different form. I don't really know. And then the rest of it gets sent back through here into this line through the canister valve, which is only on, which is why the sensor is there when the bike is running, and then that cleaned air gets sent straight into your throttle bodies through this tube here, and it wires off into both cylinders, each throttle body. Start pumping it out of there. I'll be able to take measurements of how long the lines need to be for the core motor lines I'm going to order. However, I also need to know the banjo bolt angles. So what I'm going to do is take a few pictures just to try and get them as accurate as possible. Now that those are off the caliper, you should be free to remove them up here and pull them through the bike. And then we'll just do the same process for the rear. All right, so that's the rear out. Let's see if we can't get these out. Okay, one down. I've got everything off except for this last front, going from the master cylinder to the ABS pump. It's actually routed really nicely through the back side of the number plate and the electronics in the front. So I want to retain this so I can do this in the future brake lines, and I've already measured everything out. So what I'll have is brake master cylinder to this front piece here. It'll go down this channel, go through here into the front part of the frame, and then come back out towards the bottom where the speed sensor comes out already as well, and where the other brake line, OEM brake line, went through. Come down, and then it'll come in this bolt right here under the triple clamp to a T, and it'll just go down to each caliper. So I think that'll be a pretty clean setup. It'll be out of the way of everything. It won't be cumbersome on the handlebars or anything. So we're just going to do exactly what the OEM did, but instead of going to the ABS pump and then to the brake lines, it's going to go straight through to the brake lines or the calipers. So had to take the whole number plate assembly off to get to this bolt right here to loosen this up to feed this guy out of there. So we'll go ahead and leave all that open for when the new brake lines get here. I'll send my measurements off. We'll get some core moto custom lines made, and we should be good. And then the rear will just go straight from master to the caliper like a normal bike without ABS. All right, so that was the ticket. So I just undid these 3 bolts here on this wiring piece that holds a bunch of stuff. And you can see the 2 O2 sensors. So the black line here terminates at this plug. And if those are the only 2 sensors on there, then we'll probably just be able to lose this bracket. Now we can snake it around and see how these are held on. Okay. I'm just gonna pull and pull. Boom. Save that. They route things so well, but it just makes it kind of a nightmare when you're trying to take something out. Like these are, I don't even know, some kind of push pins that are ridiculous to undo. So I'm just gonna have to probably break them off. So the tune in Power Commander 5 that I went with calls to remove these. I wasn't sure at first, so I kept them in. So if you have the auto tune expansion for the Power Commander, then you would run O2 sensors, because that's how the bike auto tunes itself, reading the air-fuel mixture ratios and whatnot. But I didn't opt for that. You know, if I make any more major changes to the bike in the future, like cams or motor work, then I'll just take it to a dyno and have it tuned. What am I dripping? Oh, of course. Okay. Getting dripped on by brake fluid, which is super cool. Stop. So with these guys out, we'll go ahead and put our plugs in. And this is nice. A little bit more room in here, more airflow. Got to put the oil cooler in still. Go ahead and take the line for the horn and tuck it back in there as well, just to have it out of the way. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and end this one here. I'm probably gonna end up speeding these videos up. There's so much footage that I took of doing everything, and I'm not sure how much of it's actually interesting, but we'll go ahead and speed up, probably do another 1 or 2 parts to try and get to the end of the build. See you guys at the next one.